epitomizes everything I admire in a person. And so part of today's sermon is about her and her work. And part of it is about things that relate to that. Today's talk is called The Human Animal. I don't know about you, but when I was a child at my aunt and uncle's summer house, we used to play a game called 20 Questions. And we played another game called Animal, Vegetable, Mineral. And sometimes we combined the two. And to make sure no one was cheating, because of course we all like to cheat, the person who was it would name something and write down what had been named on a piece of paper, and then it would be put to the side so that the person couldn't change his or her mind as the game went on. And the questions were established to determine if the chosen element was an animal, which meant that it was alive, a vegetable, which meant that it was growing, or a mineral, which meant it had come out of the earth, but was not alive. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember being very startled to realize that I was actually an animal. I was always told that I was a human, and never that I was a human animal. So, today we consider our animal natures and the nature of other animals. Do you remember when you first learned that you were an animal? Think back. How old were you? I can't even remember. If anything, what did that information mean to you? Did it mean anything, or was it just another thing that grown-ups said? Now today, what would you say if someone asked you to describe yourself as an animal? Would you describe yourself as you are? Or would you immediately think of other animals? Is there an animal image in your mind, or more than one? Is there an animal that really holds your attention? An animal to which you are drawn in life, in the wild, in a zoo, in artwork, in the jewelry you wear, in the patterns on your clothes? Perhaps this animal is one that indigenous people would describe as your spirit guide or totem. An animal whose behaviors have special lessons to teach you. Lessons that are not about the animal, but that are, in fact, about you. Or put it another way, which animal would you say best reflects your inner beast? Which animal do you admire or fear? Which animal repels you or attracts you? Now the floor is open. If you'd like to share this big secret, you can. This is not the animal that I relate to. This is one that was given to my daughter when we went to Liberty State Park, and a door slammed on my daughter, and the museum people were so upset about that they gave her this to take home. And so for some time, she wore it around her neck like this. And I'm very fond of it, because she wasn't hurt, and it was very comforting to her. So, some animals were passed out today to you. I'm wondering if any of you had a stuffed animal that was very special, or if there's a living animal that you really like a lot and relate to. Anyone? Yes?
When I was a little girl, I loved dogs above all things, but my father was allergic to anything we wanted, basically. But although he had a famous tomcat and with much imagination named Tommy,
Oh, yes.
but supposedly developed an allergy, after the war. So we had turtles and goldfish and a little canary named Peachy. But I was able to get a stuffed animal. There used to be a toy shop downtown on Main, and I fell in love with a little buff-colored cocker that I dubbed Waggy. And I got it for Christmas once. And finally, I guess in my 57th year, I got a little buff cocker spaniel whom I named Katy Perry.
You named the Cocker Spaniel Katy Perry?
Katy Perry. She's a big hit at the vet's office. And I just sort of like take it for granted now. You know, but I would have been just thrilled, and once I took my bandit, this is a representation.
Do you identify yourself as a dog?
Oh, God, no. I think I identify myself as some sort of black bird.
A black bird?
A black bird, raven crow.
Uh-huh.
Because I'm a coach. I'm fighting.
Anyone else? Yeah, Hank.
Well, the animal that's most close to me in my life is the squirrel.
The squirrel.
They surround my house. I see them everywhere, looking out the window. They're always playing, hunting for food, and they're just so creative and fascinating to watch. They're just a big part of my life.
Uh-huh. Others? Yeah, Bonnie.
I have 3 cats, and just like I have 3 children, 1 son and 2 daughters, I have 2 female cats and 1 male cat. And I always felt like I was a cat since I was very small. I loved cats. And, you know, to me they have very unique personalities, and I don't know, I just have that very strong relationship to them. Always been.
Yeah. Yes. You.
Anybody who's been to my house can know that I associate pandas, and the things that are in my house in toned down, because when you tell somebody that you like an animal and that you associate with an animal, they tend to give you tchotchkes and everything that they find for that animal. So
They do.
my husband and I have pandas, but of course my children have different things, and Alexis was born on June 28th, so she's a Cancer, which is the sign of the crab.
And you're holding a crab.
Yes. So, hence to say that my family tends to buy anything that they find as a crab. And Emily, who was born August 5th, is a Leo, which means that she's a lion. So, we have lots of crabs and lions and pandas in our house. Oh my, yes.
And unfortunately, pandas are not associated with an astrological sign, are they?
No. But
Oh, maybe in Chinese astrology?
They have a year, I think.
A year, yeah.
they're cute and cuddly.
They're big and cuddly. Any other animals anyone relates to? Yes,
I've always loved wolves.
wolves. They're very popular nowadays.
They are now, but I liked them like 50 years ago.
Uh-huh,
They weren't 60 years ago.
I'd never thought particularly about an animal as a totem for myself until a friend of mine gave me a beautiful cloisonne pin with the head of a snow leopard on it. And I looked at it and I said, "How did you know that?" And she said, "It's so you. You like to be upstairs in your house looking out the window down below to see who's down there." And I said, "Yeah, and that is what a snow leopard does." So indeed, like your family, Barb, I ended up with collections of snow leopard paraphernalia that people give me, and they write to me, "Dear leopard, blah, blah, blah." And I think it's very funny, but I also, one of my favorite books is The Snow Leopard by Peter Matheson, which is the story of his journey into the Himalayas with George Schaller, who's an ethnologist, to study other animals. And yeah, I read it the first time when I was in Nepal, in the Himalayas, so it still speaks to me very strongly. Now, no one has named an animal they're afraid of. Is anybody afraid of something in particular? Sharks. Spiders. Snakes. Snakes.
No, I love snakes.
You can go over there. Yes. What I've noticed about the animals that people name when you ask what they're afraid of, they're generally either parasites or predators. Animals that make them feel vulnerable. And, of course, that would be natural to be nervous around the ones who could hurt us. Many people can easily and readily name those animals that haunt or intrigue them. Sometimes it's because of a personal experience you had. Sometimes it's the sense that a special animal reveals something unnerving about the person who is either alarmed or attracted. Other people can't find the words to describe those feelings, but pondering an animal's role in one's history or imagination can bring surprising insight into the uncensored subconscious or the unedited mind. And it can take us into insightful understanding of ourselves as animals living among other animals. The animals that study other animals tend to be predators. They are studying so that they can kill. For them, that study is a matter of life and the survival of their species, or else death by starvation. For the preyed upon, the challenge is to escape the predator. Humans are especially complex in this area. Sometimes we are predators of other species, and sometimes we are the surprised prey. In war and interpersonal conflict, we humans can be killers or victims of our own species. The study of animal behaviors is as old as the history of humanity. Primatologist Dr. Jane Goodall has pointed out that in order to hunt, the earliest humans had to learn animal habits. They had to have brains that understood collaborative action, an ability to communicate, and the will and physical skill to attack and kill other species. They had to understand other species as possible food sources and not be reluctant to eat a creature that had a face of its own. Now, that business of the face is something that has turned a lot of people away from eating animal food. My daughter used to say, "I can't eat it if it has a face." Now, recreational and professional hunters today participate in those ancient behaviors of tracking other animals. In some ways, though, the human animal has come a long way, and I say that maybe this way, a long way, because we are now highly skilled in animal husbandry, and in many countries we are participants in the consumption of massive quantities of animal food. We also raise animals for other purposes, as pets, for entertainment industries, for medical research, as sources of labor. No other species does any of those things. Imagine your dog training another animal to be its pet. You see what I mean? No other species does that. Much of our children's literature, we have developed sophisticated analyses of animal life through observation in zoos and in the field. And unlike other species, we idealize, romanticize, and anthropomorphize the animals around us. We assign personalities much like our own to individuals and entire species. Now think about that. I'm sure you've done that at some point when talking about an animal. Oh, look, he's... Much of our children's literature and television programming is full of talking, if not dressed up animals. Can you name some? Anybody?
Penguin.
Mr. Ed? Yeah.
The penguin.
The penguin.
Anybody on Doc McStuffins?
Anyone on?
Doc McStuffins, a TV show for Alexis.
Okay.
It's all about talking stuffed animals.
Talking stuffed animals, all right.
There's actually the talking cat on Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yes.
Actually, human revolutionary turned into a cat for 100 years.
Yeah.
Sesame Street.
Sesame Street, practically every creature, right? Kermit, Miss Piggy, the most dressed up animal I can think of. Kermit doesn't wear much in the way of clothing, but nevertheless Kermit sings and he plays a banjo. Okay, and
Mickey Mouse.
Mickey Mouse. Who is the cranky duck?
Donald,
Donald Duck. Wasn't he always dressed? Yes.
half-dressed.
Half-dressed. The ducks were half-dressed. Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Babar, and Celeste.
But Mickey Mouse had a pet, right? Pluto, the dog. Is Mickey's pet Goofy's pet?
That's kind of odd, isn't it, to think of a mouse with a dog as a pet?
But the gorilla that did sign language had a kitten.
Yes, but those are real animals you're talking
Yeah,
about.
but you said no animals ever do that, but
They didn't train them.
more than one primate has done that, has adopted.
They've adopted them, but they haven't trained them to be the pet. The animals have formed a bond
Some people
in
don't
which...
train their pets very.
No, they don't. They don't. How about the Cat in the Hat? Or Bambi and Lamb Chop, Wile E. Coyote, Pepe Le Pew, Sylvester the Cat, Tom and Jerry, right? They all talk. They run around, some of them in disguise like Wile E. Coyote and Sylvester. There are hundreds of these in our culture. And isn't it amazing? Instead of talking about children, we talk about animals as examples for children as though they were the children. These stories and countless others provide entertainment, and they offer lessons we want to pass along to our young that somehow seem more palatable delivered by animal teachers than by adults. How often do we look through those books examining the truth or fiction of the way the animals in them are actually depicted? If you read Curious George as an adult, it might give you the willies. It's the story of a man who steals a monkey from its natural habitat by dropping a hat on its head and then picking it up and dropping the monkey into a sack and taking it far, far away. Dr. Jane Goodall, who lived and studied chimps in the wild for 40 years, might shudder at its conclusion that a zoo is a fabulous place to live. She does not want animals stolen and traded for lives in zoos or circuses. Other than the opening pages of Curious George, most of the animal stories for children bear very little resemblance to the actual lives of the depicted animals. The stories are really about our animal experiences. Some of our adult stories continue this trend. Consider the book Life of Pi. How many of you read that book? And how many of you saw the film? It's a book filled with glorious descriptions of animal behavior at the zoo in Pondicherry, India, and in the wild. As the story unfolds, we learn that Pi is the son of the zoo's owner-director. He has spent years studying the animals around him. His eyes are wide open to the facts of life concerning many kinds of killers, including a huge tiger named, does anyone remember its name? Richard Parker. Now, isn't that an unusual name for a tiger? Now, unless you are a naturalist or a zoologist, it's difficult to know if the ideas that Pi expresses are scientifically true or if they're pure imagination. That's one of the elements in the book that I found fascinating, wondering about that. I'd like to read you some of Pi's thoughts about life in the zoo versus life in the wild. Animals in the wild, this is Pi speaking, animals in the wild lead lives of compulsion and necessity within an unforgiving social hierarchy in an environment where the supply of fear is high and the supply of food is low, and where territory must be constantly defended and parasites forever endured. What is the meaning of freedom in such a context? Animals in the wild are in practice free, neither in space, nor in time, nor in their personal relations. In theory, that is, as a simple physical possibility, an animal could pick up and go, flaunting all the social conventions and boundaries proper to its species. But such an event is less likely to happen than for a member of our own species, say a shopkeeper with all the usual ties, to family, to friends, to society, to drop everything and walk away from his life with only the spare change in his pockets and the clothes on his frame. And as you know, people do this all the time. They decide to disappear. They decide to just walk away from all of their attachments. Pi goes on to say, if a man, boldest and most intelligent of creatures, won't wander from place to place, a stranger to all, beholden to none, why would an animal which by temperament is far more conservative? For that is what animals are, conservative. One might even say reactionary. The smallest changes upset them. They want things to be just so, day after day, month after month. Surprises are highly disagreeable to them. Just think of this. How do your animals react when you start packing suitcases? And when you get out the cat carrier? Ooh. And what about when you open the flea medication and the cat smells it? Yeah? They know. They know something is going to change that day, and they don't like it. You see this in their spatial relations. An animal inhabits its space, whether in a zoo or in the wild, the same way chess pieces move about a chessboard, significantly. There is no more happenstance, no more freedom involved in the whereabouts of a lizard or a bear or a deer than in the location of a knight on a chessboard. Both speak of pattern and purpose. In the wild, animals stick to the same paths, and they do, right? You can track animals easily. They stick to the same paths for the same pressing reasons, season after season. In a zoo, if an animal is not in its normal place, in its regular posture at the usual hour, it means something. It may be a reflection of nothing more than a minor change in the environment. A coiled hose left out by a keeper has made a menacing impression. A puddle has formed that bothers the animal. A ladder is making a shadow. But it could mean something more. At its worst, it could be that most dreaded thing to a zoo director, a symptom, a herald of something to come, a reason to inspect the dung, to cross-examine the keeper, to summon the vet, all this because a stork is not standing where it usually stands. Now, Pi is a budding zoologist and also a theologian. He is a boy who wants so badly to get close to God that he practices his own forms of Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity all at the same time. Perhaps he's a Unitarian. Now, Jan Martel, who wrote the book, doesn't say that, but I found myself thinking, wow. Pi feels admiration or disgust for various animals as the situation dictates, but he always understands animals as a gift from God. Overall, he is deeply empathic with their terror and their struggles to survive. Always he is aware of his own life as just one more in the scheme of nature. He also observes that all living things contain an element of madness in strange, sometimes inexplicable ways. This madness can be saving. It is part of the ability to adapt. Without it, most species would not survive. Now, in a very real and poetic style, primatologist Dr. Goodall shares the actual story of her life in a book called Reason for Hope, A Spiritual Journey. She, like Pi, has been entranced with the living world and with matters of the spirit. She turned 80 years old on April 3rd of this year. Her work has been documented in many books and in numerous National Geographic specials. But it did not begin that way. She grew up along the coast of England, tended to by her very devoted mother and grandmother. In most respects, it was an idyllic childhood. It began with her curiosity about and love of virtually every creature that crossed her path. One day she was given a stuffed animal, a toy chimpanzee that she named Jubilee. It was actually one of thousands made to commemorate the birth of the first chimpanzee at the London Zoo. They were all named Jubilee. And Jane's chimp was as large as she was, and some members of her family were rather alarmed that she was walking holding this chimpanzee in front of her. It turned out to be a touchstone for her life, a talisman of what became the great adventure of her life. On a trip to Africa when she was 23, she met anthropologist Louis Leakey, an encounter that changed her life forever. He was the curator of the Museum of Natural History in Kenya at the time, and he asked her to go to Tanganyika and devise a field study of the chimps who lived there. Jane had absolutely no academic credentials of any kind, and especially not for this work. But she had curiosity, a love of living creatures, empathy, and imagination. She was also an avid note-taker. Moving to live in the eastern mountains of the country was a spiritually transformative event for her. There she experienced more than once a mystical awareness of the majesty of creation. Lying on the forest floor, listening to a favorite chimp, foraging high in the treetops, feeling the sun through the leaves, was a magical moment for her. Almost totally untrained as a naturalist, her first years in the forest were spent recording everything around her in great detail, including her emotional responses to what she was watching, something that men never did. She didn't know what might or might not be important, and so she recorded it all. She observed from a distance with binoculars, and over time she moved in to sit quietly at close quarters with the chimps. Whether it was life or death, she reported in a very personal way about the positive way the animals interacted with each other. She wondered about their emotional lives, their losses and successes, their pain and grief, their aggression. Was their behavior calculated to cause pain, or was that just the way a human might think about it? Along the way, she did something else that was unthinkable. She named the chimps, something men never did. She named them David Greybeard, one of her favorites, Flo, Faustino, Freud, my favorite, Fifi, Gremlin, Gimbal, and Galahad. And those were just the first ones that she studied. Traditional naturalists scoffed at this. They numbered animals. She learned to know them instead as individuals with personalities. She watched them carefully, obsessively noting both their cruel and caring behaviors. She was the first naturalist to report on the creation and use of tools by chimps, which until then had always been thought unique to humans. And she was the first to describe how some of them hunted other animals for food, specifically bush pigs, sometimes smaller monkeys, sometimes baby baboons. They had been thought to be vegetarians, but turned out to be omnivores. She saw how they danced with excitement, how they wrestled with abandon, and kissed each other fondly in greeting. She was also the first to report that two chimps habitually tormented the others and killed their young, and sometimes ate them. And she noted how some chimps terrorized their former friends when they left them and took over territory that had once been open to the entire troop. Now, recently, Animal Planet has shown specials of zebras and lions doing exactly the same thing, killing off the young of other adults in their surroundings because they don't believe them to be their own and because they're considered future rivals for dominance in the troop. Meerkats have been described as doing the same thing, killing off the baby meerkats of other adults. Although we share significant genetic material with chimps, we are not descended from them, but from a common ancestor. On the primate family tree, we come down different branches. Studying them inevitably brought Jane to questions about being human. So here we are, she writes, the human ape, half sinner, half saint, with two opposing tendencies inherited from our pasts, pulling us now toward violence, now toward compassion and love. Are we forever to be torn in two directions, cruel in one instance, kind in the next? Or do we have the ability to control our tendencies? During the 70s, these questions and many others consumed her. Is chimp aggression the same as ours, or is it something different? Do they attack each other for the same reasons that we attack other people? Do they experience remorse? Do they experience grief? And do we really experience those feelings? Can chimps conceptualize things and events that are not immediately present in the way that human beings can? Do they understand the consequences of their actions the way we think we do? Is there generosity, and they are occasionally very generous, feeding each other, offering care to each other, grooming each other constantly? Is it calculated, or is it spontaneous? As time went on, she revised her thought that chimps were rather nicer than humans. Both are animal, and one is further along the path to spiritual evolution. And this, she believed, is a significant difference. It is the most important distinction, that we have evolved physically, and unlike our primate relations, we continue to evolve spiritually. In the best of all worlds, we will continue doing that throughout our lives. Jane Goodall nowadays is famous as a committed conservationist of earth resources and speaks with grief about the destruction of the rainforest along the shores of Lake Tanganyika, and about the cruelty toward animals in research facilities and toward those bred for human consumption. Raised in a Congregationalist family, she went through her own crisis of faith during her lifetime. Despite her understandable despair over the death of her husband, which was a grueling one from cancer in Africa, deep within Jane has remained an intense spirituality that keeps her ever mindful of her place in the web of all living creatures. Her love of the chimps in their natural habitat extends to her love for all animal species and the human family. Her personal experiences of suffering extends to the civil wars in Africa, to the kidnappings of field workers in the mountains, to the death of her husband, to a visit to Auschwitz that she described as bringing her to her knees. The empathy in her that was despised by more traditional scientists she worked with has entirely shaped her understanding of the world. Most of those who scoffed at her actually took years to catch up with her. Despite continued genocidal wars and the devastation of the planet and its life forms, Dr. Goodall still believes that we have reason for hope. These stem directly to 4 specific realities. The human brain is the first. The energy and enthusiasm that can be engendered in young people, the indomitable human spirit, and the resilience of nature. But time is of the essence. It is important that each person takes action, be committed to doing what he or she can to protect life on this planet. She herself, I would say, is reason for hope. She promotes respect for the inherent worth and dignity of all animals in life, and unspoken though it may be, the 7th principle is deeply embedded in her and is manifested in her actions throughout the 60 years she has spent doing her work. It began for her with small animals, with Jubilee, the stuffed chimpanzee that she still has today at age 80. As I said, it was her touchstone into a deeper world and a deeper humanity. We, humans, have notions of goodness and compassion. She has noted that unlike many other animals, we can remember the past and look into the future and shape it, something we are not sure other animals can do. It is up to us to decide what kind of animals we will be. As she says, each of us impacts the world around us every single day, every single moment of every day. We have the choice to make the world a better place or not to bother. So, thinking back to those animals in the beginning of this talk, would you choose another species? Or would you choose to grow spiritually as a human being and say, I am a human being and proud of it?